Next, Broadway's greatest hits in the Golden Age. From Oklahoma to Guys and Dolls, from Carousel to My Fair Lady. It's all on Broadway, the American musical. I once auditioned for a show by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein called Pipe Dream, and it played in this very theater. I was in awe of their work because, beginning with Oklahoma in the middle of the Second World War, they had pioneered a kind of show in which the story was more important than anything else. In the 1940s and 50s, dramatic stories were transformed into a wealth of Broadway classics, including the Lerner and Loewe musical that I took instead of Pipe Dream, My Fair Lady. Oh, how lovely it was, the golden age of the Broadway musical. Throughout World War II, with the threat of enemy aircraft a constant fear, the lights of New York City were frequently turned off.
Broadway, target #1 for pleasure seekers of the world. Oh, you can douse its glimmer for an hour. You can pull some switches and make it dark as pitch. But the lights are all there waiting, and they'll come on again as sure as shooting. Because this is Broadway. Because this is America.
As wartime enveloped New York, the 47-year-old writer and lyricist Oscar Hammerstein II retreated to his farm in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. There, in the spring of 1942, he was struggling to adapt Georges Bizet's opera Carmen into an all-black musical.
My grandfather was at a low point in his career. He was considered something of a has-been and a relic of an earlier time. His greatest hits were a good 11, 12 years behind him. He was no longer working with anyone, and he was trying to refocus his craft.
I got to know him in the country, not in the city. He was a surrogate father to me from the age of 11 to 15. Oscar saw in me somebody he could pass knowledge on to, somebody who was interested in writing songs. Essentially, what I associate him with is that front porch and sitting there, you know, and looking at the sunset over the fields and the cows in the distance, and his kind of open-hearted view of the world.
In April of '42, Oscar received a phone call from composer Richard Rodgers, who wanted to adapt a play about cowboys and ranchers into a new musical. Rodgers' partner, Larry Hart, was in ill health, depressed and unfit to work. But Hammerstein was intrigued by the homespun drama and teamed up with Rodgers. The resulting show ushered in a new era in musical theater.
Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain, and the waving wheat can sure smell sweet when the wind comes right behind the rain. Oklahoma, every night, my honey lamb and I sit alone and talk and watch a hawk making lazy circles in the sky.
Oklahoma is a very simple story, but it is a story. And it is about character, though on a very naive level. It attempts to explore relationships the way a play does. And that had not been done in commercial musical theater.
Musical comedy, which is what it was originally called, stopped really with the Rodgers and Hammerstein shows. The word comedy got dropped. It was then the musical. And from that point on, the creative drive of the shows was from the writers of the show.
You're doing fine, Oklahoma, Oklahoma, okay.
Oklahoma signaled the beginning of a time when a well-crafted story poignant, funny, or dramatic, became the essential element of the Broadway musical. When Dick Rodgers left Larry Hart to work with Oscar Hammerstein, he gained a partner who favored sincerity over cynicism, and who wrote the dialogue as well as the song lyrics.
Oscar invented the musical book. It started to take form in Showboat, and then when he got finally to Oklahoma, he was dealing with a book that was quite difficult. He made the score follow the book instead of, it had always been the other way around. The book had been following the score around somewhat like The Elephant Keeper and cleaning up after it to make it a show. Suddenly, along came Oscar, and the story took over.
The farmer is a good and thrifty citizen.
Yeah, he's thrifty, all right.
No matter what the cowman says or thinks, you seldom see him drinking in a barroom, unless somebody else is buying drinks.
By the time they worked together, Rodgers had already scored 30 musicals, while Hammerstein had written 27 shows. They drew upon this vast experience in reimagining the musical form. No musical numbers to showcase a star, no songs written just to become popular hits. Even the show's opening number went against the grain of expectations.
The curtain went up.
There's a bright golden,
There was an old lady sitting there churning butter.
there's a bright golden haze
Churning butter? That's the opening of a musical?
is as high as a
And everybody's saying, what kind of a show is this? What kind of a show is this?
looks like it's climbing clear up to the sky. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I got a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way.
Oklahoma also changed the role that dance played in a musical. Choreographer Agnes DeMille was the niece of the epic filmmaker Cecil B. DeMille, and she had strong ideas of how dance could do more than simply entertain.
I think one of the landmark innovations in the American musical was made by Agnes DeMille. The Dream Ballet, Laurie's Dream, had never been seen on Broadway stage because the dancing became storytelling.
In DeMille's Dream Ballet, the choreography explored Oklahoma's love triangle. Laurie, a flirtatious young girl, Curly, a love-struck cowboy, and Judd, a brooding hired hand.
Oscar originally outlined a dream ballet with a circus. And I said to Oscar, Mr. Hammerstein, what has this ballet to do with the play? This is not the kind of dream that young girls who are worried have. It would be a dream of terror and a haunted dream. And so I said, also, you haven't any sex in the first act. He said, I haven't? I said, goodness, no.
When Oklahoma opened at the St. James Theater, the United States had been at war for 16 months. With empty seats to fill, the cast offered free tickets to coax U.S. servicemen into the theater. The GI's emotional response to the show hinted at the enormous success that was to come.
Everybody who came to that show, all the soldiers, went overseas for the duration. And I remember so well that triple row of uniforms at the back. The men watching this folksy show, happy, light, with the tears streaming down their cheeks because it symbolized home and what they were going to die for.
there wasn't another empty seat for years. Not only was Oklahoma the hottest ticket on Broadway, but it led to a best-selling cast album that brought the original performances into living rooms across the nation.
And when we turn, we're only saying, "Go, doing fine."
Oklahoma played for 5 solid years, breaking the record for the longest-running musical by over 800 performances. There are now over 600 productions, amateur and professional, in the United States each year. On any given day, 2 separate performances of Oklahoma are likely to be playing somewhere in America.
We've got one day here and not another minute to see the famous sights. We'll find the romance and danger waiting in it beneath the Broadway lights. But we've hair on our chests, so what we like the best of the nights. Sights, sights, nights.
New York, a wonderful town. The Bronx is up and the Battery's down. The people ride in a hole in the ground. New York, it's a wonderful town.
Inspired by the success of Oklahoma, a group of young artists got together in 1944 to create a new musical. Adolph Green, Betty Comden, Leonard Bernstein, and Jerome Robbins were all in their 20s. Following the lead of Oscar Hammerstein, they set out to write what was then being called the integrated musical.
We were all novices, we really were. We didn't know a goddamn thing about doing a show.
We just decided to write down, what we wanted to do or not do. We wanted the show to be integrated. We wanted everything in it to serve the show. We wanted things to be direct and simple and honest and not fancy, not phony. I think we wrote all this down on a piece of paper.
The musical, entitled On the Town, was the story of 3 sailors on a 24-hour shore leave, searching for fun and romance in New York City.
One unusual thing about On the Town, which makes it unique, I think, even today, is Lenny's score is a symphonic score. The reason it hasn't happened again is that nobody could do it but Lenny.
Bernstein was able to capture kind of hyper-energized throb of the city, and he saw that the orchestra itself could be a major protagonist in the musical, and the dance sequences could have a kind of drive, a kind of danger that was very powerful.
Jerome Robbins had first collaborated with Bernstein on the ballet Fancy Free. Choreographing a musical gave him the chance to mix ideas from his classical dance background with whimsical stories and comic situations.
It was all very contemporary. The war was still on, the sailors were around, the life was right there on the streets for us to see.
He was very funny. Jerry was one of the few choreographers who really had humor. And the vitality of New York and ordinary people like subway riders and sailors, and not magic swans or enchanted princes, but, people.
On the Town opened at the Adelphi Theatre on December 28, 1944, and playfully captured the frantic search for love during wartime.
I'm a Lady Hack, see, and I'm on the town and on the make. Hey, come here. This guy's on a 24-hour pass, and he wants to see the sights in New York. But, I think he's kind of cute. So... Well, let's go up to my place.
Oh, I'd like to, lady.
What's really fascinating is the sense of power that the women in On the Town have. These women have sexual drives, are assertive, are in command, and that Laurie from Oklahoma was invented. And 1 year later, you have Hildy and Claire who are like, come here, I need a man.
Let's go to my place.
Let's go to Cleopatra's Needle.
Let's go to my place.
Let's see Wanamaker's store.
Let's go to my place.
Go to Lindy's, go to Luke
Go
Chow's.
to my place.
Let's see Radio City and Herald Square.
Let's go to my place.
Go to Reuben.
Go to my place.
Go to Macy's.
Go to my place.
The Roxy.
Go to my place.
Royster,
My place.
Gimbel,
My place.
Flatiron,
My place.
Building.
My place.
Hip
My place.
Along with the humorous escapades of its young lovers, On the Town vividly captured the spirit of a country at war with an uncertain future.
Well, we were all in the middle of the war. My husband was in the Army, and it absolutely colored all our lives tremendously. And the pain of being separated was very tangible.
Where has the time all gone to? Haven't done half the things we want to. Oh, well, we'll catch up some other time.
There's so much more embracing still to be done, but time is racing. Oh, well, we'll catch up some other time.
I did have the feeling, what a brief moment life and joy can be.
The feeling of poignancy that you cram as much as you can into the few hours you've got because you don't know whether you'll have any more. That hangs over the whole show.
To follow up the success of Oklahoma, Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein made a daring choice, adapting Lilium, a bleak Hungarian drama, into a musical set in 19th century New England, Carousel. At the heart of the play was an intense but doomed love affair, not the kind of romance that typified Broadway musicals.
Say, tell me something. Ain't you scared of me? I mean, that's what that cop said about my taking money from girls.
I ain't scared.
That's your name? Julie? Julie something?
Julie Jordan.
I don't think they questioned for a moment the advisability of doing something about a guy who was pretty rough on his wife and who committed suicide. Oklahoma gave them the confidence to say, this is a great story. People don't usually do stories like this in the musical theater, but let's do it.
If I loved you, time and again I would try to say all I'd want you to know.
The ballad was one of the great centers of a musical, but the fact is that a ballad can't be sung until the characters know each other. You can't sing undying love to someone you just met. So Oscar invented the conditional ballad. The first one I know about was in Showboat, only make-believe. We're just make-believe we're in love. Then comes Oklahoma. People will say we're in love. We're not, but people will say we're in love. Then Carousel comes along, if I loved you. It's all in future. It's all in conditional. And so you could have a wonderful ballad in the first act. That was Oscar's invention and brilliance.
If I loved you.
Rodgers and Hammerstein were not timid about changing their source material. While the play Lilium was bitter and pessimistic, Oscar depicted a world where even the most troubled man could dream of his family's future with hope and optimism.
My boy Bill, I will see that he's named after me. I will. My boy Bill, he'll be tall and as tough as a tree. Will Bill like a tree.
The soliloquy from Carousel was a change for Billy. And you're not sure you like the guy when he goes around slapping her and being rough with her and everything, until he gets to the soliloquy and she just told him that he's going to be a father. And this brings out a whole nother quality.
I can tell him. Wait a minute. Could it be? What if he is a girl? A girl.
An audience responds to what's going on underneath, and it's very hard to listen to Carousel without being moved. It isn't just that it's basically a story that the audience wants to hear, love conquers death, etc., etc. Whether you believe the happy endings or not, they're characters and stories that concern them, and it's because of the way Oscar told those stories.
I gotta get ready before she comes. I gotta make certain that she won't be dragged up in slums with a lot of bums like me.
My major memory in my teens is when Oscar took me to New Haven to see the first night of Carousel. I was so moved at the end of the first act that I cried into Dorothy Hammerstein's fur. She had this good luck fur she always wore. And you know, tears can stain fur, and I think she was never able to use it again because I was bawling so heavily. But I remember the way the stage looked at the end of the first act, and I was just awash.
She's gotta be sheltered and fed and dressed in the best that money can buy. I never knew how to get money, but I'll try, by God, I'll try. I'll go out and make it, or steal it, or take it, or die.
Within 3 weeks of the opening of Carousel, the war in Europe was over. For a brief time in the 1940s, the picture of a more inclusive America was reflected on the Broadway stage in shows like Call Me Mister, St. Louis Woman, and Finian's Rainbow, which satirized race relations in the Deep South. These ambitious shows